So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the book, Don't Miss the Moment, and what it is and what it's expressing about. So the book is an exploration of 12 different sermon topics, and it's demonstrating what's called Narraphoric preaching. And that's a made-up word, because once you get a doctorate, you get to make words up. So Narraphor, what that relates to, is a metaphor that is then taken and you weave a whole narrative through it. So it's like a whole story that's built on metaphor. And Jesus was particularly fond of doing stuff like that. So he would talk about being the good shepherd. And of course, he wasn't actually talking about working with sheep. He was using that as a metaphor. And there are lots of different metaphors that are in the Bible. So the reason for developing this form of preaching is that a lot of times you can look at the scripture and it can feel really flat, right? So flatten out a disc of Play-Doh right here. And it can feel flat, but once you start to interact with it a little bit, you can notice that right there in the flattened disc of Play-Doh, you can see the palm print of your own hand. Isn't that interesting? So one of the things with looking at the Narraphor is trying to make sure that what we see in the scripture is not just the impression that we leave on the scripture, but rather the impression that Christ leaves on us. Yeah, cool. That's my grandson laughing there. So one of the interesting narraphoric metaphors that we see in scripture is that of the snake. So you can go ahead and take your Play-Doh and roll it out like a snake, right? So remember the first place you see a story about a snake? Genesis, that's right. So there's a serpent that tempts Eve into eating the apple. You know of any other stories where there were snakes or serpents?
I know there's the verse about taking up snakes and being okay.
Yeah, that's in the Gospel of Matthew, and that's crazy pants that we don't go to. But there's a verse in Psalm 46, and it's talking about really extraordinary faith and trust in God. And it says that your trust in God should be such that when the fullness of God's love and creation comes, the child will be able to step on an adder, which is a kind of a snake, right? So ideally, we're not going to be stepping on any snakes, but the idea is that whenever there are snaky ideas, worries, that are just kind of slithering through our minds, that when we are able to put our trust in God, that God will take that bite, that sting of that worry and that anxiety away, which is really kind of a cool idea, right? So I want to see Grandma Ellen's snake here. Ooh, yeah. That's quite the cobra. Yeah, that's pretty frightening right there. But the idea that we can look at the scripture and come up with an image that really speaks to us and speaks to the grace of God that we can find in our lives is powerful. So again, you can flatten out that disc and recall that the whole idea and practice of our faith is so that we can experience the imprint of Christ on our hearts.
Cool.
Thank you.